Further debate. The member from Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, it's my pleasure to speak to Bill 36 today. I guess this is the first bill introduced in the House from our new Agriculture Minister, and it's pretty clear she's new to the job, because if this Bill 36 is supposed to do anything to improve or facilitate greater local food production and distribution, it fails miserably in its attempt. I think, Speaker, what I'd like to do for the premiers and the minister's education, read a little bit from a Globe and Mail story that was published here in January of this year. And I'll just read portions of it, because I think it really indicates what is the problem with improving or increasing local food production and distribution. And it starts this way. 2 chicken inspectors showed up at a farm in southern Ontario not long ago. They flashed badges and inspected the premises, and sure enough, they found what they were looking for: chickens, about 100 of them, wandering across the pastures. The inspectors quickly put a stop to this. They told the farmer to get rid of his chickens or face the consequences, which are $10,000 a day. And then they went around to all the other neighboring farms with the same badges and the same threats. They were not the police or the RCMP or public health officials. They were employees of the Chicken Farmers of Ontario, the body that represents Ontario's 1,000 quota-holding chicken farmers. And they have the legal right to inspect the books, records and documents, lands and premises of anybody who has chickens in our province, Speaker. You see, quota is a legal requirement for having turkeys, chickens, eggs, or cows in Canada and in Ontario. And if you're not a member of that cartel, then you are often acting illegally and in contravention to the law. And just to give some context here, in Ontario, you are allowed to own upwards of 300 chickens if you are registered with the Chicken Farmers of Ontario without purchasing quota. But if you should want to have more than 300 chickens in Ontario, you have to buy quota, and the minimum allotment for chickens is about, to get into the business, is about 90,000 units or $1.5 million at the current rates. So you cannot be a small producer of chickens or turkeys or anything with feathers in this province unless you pay the $1.5 million entry fee into the cartel. The same thing applies with eggs. If you want to be a small egg producer, you are allowed to have up to 100 laying hens as long as they're registered with the Egg Farmers of Ontario. Heaven forbid if somebody should have an unregistered laying hen in the province, but they too are subject to those drastic and onerous fines if their chicken is not registered. To become the entry level to buy quota for eggs in this province is about 5,000 units or about $500,000 in costs to the cartel. And I could go on. The same thing applies with dairy. So as the Premier and the new Minister of Agriculture talks about her desire to increase distribution and production of local food in this province, even going so far as to creating a new and proclaiming a new Local Food Awareness Week in October of each year, these tremendous, costly impediments and obstacles are there in front of everybody who should choose to want to be a local producer, a producer of local food. Speaker, I think it's just hypocrisy, this Bill 36, to suggest that local food production, distribution, and consumption is being facilitated by Bill 36 when these onerous obstacles are still present and not being touched. Once again, the $500,000 to get into the egg business, unless you just want to have 100 hens. And I would dare anybody in this legislature and anybody in this province to make a profitable living with 100 chickens laying eggs. They might make $15 or $20 a day with the amount of eggs that 100 chickens can lay. Certainly not enough to even pay the property tax on their barns, let alone and earn a living for themselves and their family. This is just ridiculous that this government continues to leave these problems and barriers in face. But it goes long and past the cartel and the quota as well. If anybody cared to look at the regulations that surround moving your local produce, your local food, into the tables of consumers, you will find an incredible maze of ridiculous, costly barriers called regulations. I'd like to just, here's one that I think people might be interested to know. The Ontario Health Food Promotion and Protection Act lists what are appropriate foods that are to be sold at farmers markets. Because of course, fresh meats are not allowed to be sold at farmers markets. Ungraded eggs are not allowed to be sold at farmers markets. But the health units do produce an appropriate list of what can be sold at farmers markets, and they include things such as canned pop, bags of potato chips, popsicles, and chewing gum. That is what this province has listed as appropriate products to be sold at a farmer's market. I've yet to come across a popsicle tree, Speaker, and I bet you there's not many people who have come across a popsicle tree in this province, but it is allowed and appropriate to sell those popsicles off the popsicle tree at our farmers markets. Same with chewing gum. I know there's bushes of chewing gum plants all across the province producing multitudes of chewing gum, and they of course are allowed at the farmers markets as well. But heaven forbid if somebody should want to sell an egg at a farmer's market or a chicken breast, then they're in trouble. Then they've got the heavy hand of the law to deal with, just as those farmers in southern Ontario who were doing that vile, atrocious, evil act of having 100 unregistered chickens on their land and facing $10,000 in fines. So I do think if this government is indeed caring and compassionate for small producers and interested and honestly, genuinely wanting to facilitate the increased production, distribution, and consumption of local food, let's start dealing with the real problems and put your proclamation week of Food Awareness Week on the back burner and start dealing with the real problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions and comments? The member for Timiskaming.